blood-red sunrise paints the Pacific waters on February 16, 1945. Long shadows stretch across a tiny volcanic island. The beast-like shape sleeps in the ocean depths. This is Iwo Jima territory. 8 square miles of black sand and approaching death. The island waits 750 miles south of Tokyo. Rear Admiral William Spike Blandy stands on his flagship's bridge. His binoculars focus on the target below. This island has consumed his thoughts for months. His mind races with tactical calculations. 6 massive battleships surround him in perfect formation. The USS Arkansas floats in position. The Texas maintains her deadly stance. Nevada sits ready for destruction. New York prepares her massive guns. Idaho and Tennessee complete the line of death. These fleet veterans mount 74 heavy guns combined. Today marks their moment to unleash absolute hell. Blandy earned his nickname through unshakable resolve. The Rock never trembled under pressure. Pearl Harbor's disaster couldn't break him. He watched the Navy's torpedo program collapse there. The bloody Normandy beaches tested him further. These same ships pounded German fortifications into dust. Now he commands the Pacific War's most devastating pre-invasion bombardment in history. Yet 8,000 yards away, something waits in darkness. Deep beneath Mount Suribachi's volcanic slopes, Colonel Kanahiko Atsuchis crouches in his underground command center. His weathered hands grip a field telephone tightly. The connection reaches 1,000 men throughout the extinct volcano. They hide in caves and tunnels everywhere. These defenses aren't ordinary military positions. An 18-mile underground labyrinth took 8 months to complete. Atsuchis knows something Admiral Blandy doesn't understand. This knowledge will transform the next 3 days. America's most expensive Pacific War lesson approaches rapidly. Sulfur scents drift from Iwo Jima's volcanic vents. Soon, cordite and death will replace these natural smells. The morning air carries hints of approaching violence. In hours, history's most powerful naval bombardment begins. When silence returns, both sides will discover brutal truth. Brute force means nothing against invisible enemies. Underground warfare changes everything completely. Every military planner fears one haunting question. What happens when unstoppable force meets immovable will? This question receives its most brutal answer today. Blandy raises his hand to signal bombardment. 30,000 Marines crowd transport ship decks beyond the horizon. They watch the show supposed to clear their victory path. These Marines have no idea what approaches. They're witnessing modern warfare's most terrifying truth. Sometimes destroying everything above ground makes underground threats deadlier. The clock shows X 600 hours. In 60 seconds, the Pacific War's bloodiest chapter begins. Not with Japanese attack, but American failure. This bombardment will fail so catastrophically, it changes history's course forever. Understanding today's events requires returning 8 months back. June 1944 brought Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi to Iwo Jima. Unlike other Japanese Pacific commanders, Kuribayashi lived in America previously. Harvard educated him about American industrial power. He understood Japan couldn't win through conventional warfare. Standing on Iwo Jima's black beaches, watching engineers survey terrain, Kuribayashi made history-defining decisions. He refused fighting Americans at the water's edge. Previous Japanese defenders died there under naval gunfire. Instead, he would let them land successfully. Let them celebrate their apparent victory. Then kill them from invisible positions they never expected. "The Americans will come," he told his officers calmly. "When they arrive, we make them pay with blood for every yard gained." Kuribayashi's 8-month construction project was unprecedented in military history. Japanese engineers used Iwo Jima's natural caves and volcanic fissures. They blasted an entire underground city. Command bunkers sat 75 feet below ground level. Tunnels connected everything, wide enough for truck traffic. Artillery positions were carved into Mount Suribachi's heart. Firing ports disguised themselves as natural cave openings. Storage rooms filled with ammunition, water, medical supplies. Barracks housed 21,000 men living like underground moles. Every position was designed for naval bombardment survival. Every tunnel featured multiple escape exits. Every gun placement supported 2 others with crossfire capability. American B-24 bombers pounded the island daily starting December 1944. They hit empty bunkers and fake positions. Real defenders waited safely underground, completely protected. Admiral Blandy knew nothing about this underground fortress. His bombardment plan seemed foolproof. 3 days of intensive shelling would precede Marine landings. 4 times Tarawa's firepower, where similar defenses crumbled within hours. Marine commanders desperately begged for 10 bombardment days. Blandy remained confident 3 days was sufficient. "We'll blow that island completely off the map," he told his staff confidently. "Nothing survives what we're throwing at them." At 8:03 on February 16th, USS Tennessee's 14-inch guns roared to life. The sound defies description, a physical force shaking the ocean itself. Within minutes, all 6 battleships fired in perfect sequence. Massive shells screamed across morning sky like freight trains. Each shell weighed as much as small cars. Each carried enough explosive for city block destruction. From transport ships, Marines watched in absolute awe. Iwo Jima disappeared behind smoke and flame walls. Geysers of black sand and volcanic rock shot hundreds of feet skyward. The island seemed to convulse under punishment. Its surface rippled like disturbed water. "Jesus Christ," whispered Corpsman John Bradley from USS Missoula. "How could anything survive that destruction?" But Colonel Atsuchis, deep in his command bunker, felt only vibrations through volcanic rock. His telephone network remained completely intact. His ammunition dumps sat untouched by shells. His carefully positioned guns waited silently in cave mouths. They remained invisible to American spotting aircraft circling overhead. The bombardment continued relentlessly for 3 full days. 14,000 tons of shells fell on the island. More firepower than entire World War I battles. American newspaper headlines celebrated Iwo Jima's complete pulverization. Military analysts predicted 4-day island conquest. Yet disturbing signs emerged for observant leaders. Spotting aircraft reported no secondary explosions occurring. Ammunition dumps weren't detonating as expected. No major fires burned beyond initial shell impacts. Most troubling of all, Japanese anti-aircraft guns kept firing from positions that should have been obliterated hours earlier. Lieutenant Commander Frank Peterson flew spotting missions for the 5th Marine Division. He radioed back increasingly troubling reports. "I'm seeing muzzle flashes from caves that should be complete rubble. These positions are dug much deeper than we originally thought." Admiral Blandy dismissed such concerns completely. His battle damage assessments showed extensive destruction across the entire island. Aerial photographs revealed countless shell craters everywhere. Demolished buildings lay scattered like toys. Shattered airfields couldn't support aircraft operations. By any conventional measure, the bombardment was succeeding perfectly. But deep beneath Mount Suribachi, Colonel Atsuchis studied his maps carefully. He checked communications with growing satisfaction. The Americans were firing at shadows and phantoms. They wasted ammunition on empty positions constantly. His real defenses remained completely untouched by shells. His men reported only minor damage from occasional near misses. The tunnel network held strong and secure. As the third bombardment day drew to a close, Atsuchi issued his final battle orders. Tomorrow, when Marines landed on beaches, his men would wait patiently. They'd let beaches fill completely with American troops and equipment. They'd watch initial waves establish their beachheads successfully. They'd observe signals of success flowing back to ships. Then, at precisely the perfect moment, 21,000 Japanese soldiers would emerge from the earth. Like an army of the dead rising, they'd turn those beaches into Marine Corps history's bloodiest killing field. The bombardment ended at sunset on February 18th. In gathering darkness, American ships reported mission accomplished successfully. Intelligence estimates suggested Japanese strength reduced by 60%. The island was ready for invasion operations. But in his underground command post, General Kuribayashi penned a letter to his wife. "The Americans believe they have weakened us significantly," he wrote carefully. "Tomorrow, they will learn that some things cannot be destroyed by fire from heaven above. Tomorrow, they will learn that the earth itself can fight back against invaders." Night fell over Iwo Jima like a death shroud. 30,000 Marines prepared for what they expected would be routine landing operations. Above ground, the island resembled the moon's surface, cratered, blasted, completely lifeless in appearance. Below ground, an entire army waited in perfect readiness. They prepared to spring Pacific War history's deadliest trap. February 19th, 1945. HU hour, Euro 900. The morning broke clear and perfectly calm over Iwo Jima. Perfect conditions for amphibious landing operations. Aboard transport ships, 30,000 Marines crowded into their landing craft. Many joked nervously about the easy day ahead of them. The 3-day bombardment left the island looking like a moonscape. Surely nothing could have survived that hellish punishment. Private Jim Naughton of the 28th Marine Regiment climbed into his Higgins boat. He was loaded down with rifle, ammunition, and heavy field pack. Around him, his buddies remained uncharacteristically quiet. "Nobody talked at all," he would later recall vividly. "God only knew what was waiting ahead of us." At 0859, precisely on schedule, the first wave of LVT amphibious tractors churned toward Iwo Jima's southeastern beaches. Behind them, waves of Marines followed in perfect sequence. They were timed to hit beaches every 5 minutes, like clockwork precision. This was the Pacific War's largest amphibious assault in history. A perfectly orchestrated ballet of sea power and Marines. Admiral Blandy watched from his flagship as first LVTs touched black volcanic sand. His spotters reported no enemy fire detected. No resistance encountered whatsoever. The bombardment had worked exactly as planned and predicted. But those black beaches held a terrible secret within them. The sand wasn't just dark in color. It was made of volcanic ash so fine that men sank to their ankles with every step taken. Running became completely impossible. Digging foxholes was like trying to shovel water. Marines who stumbled off their landing craft found themselves trapped in nature's own killing ground. Lieutenant Colonel Chandler Johnson of the 2nd Battalion, 28th Marines watched his men struggle forward in slow motion. They were weighed down by equipment and fighting treacherous footing. Behind them, more landing craft arrived every 5 minutes. This created exactly the target-rich environment General Kuribayashi had been waiting for patiently. For 30 minutes, an eerie calm settled over the beaches completely. Marines pushed inland, securing their objectives with surprising ease. Some began believing the bombardment actually worked as intended. Radio reports flowed back to the fleet continuously. Landing proceeding according to plan. Light resistance encountered. Deep beneath Mount Suribachi, Colonel Atsuchi watched through his periscope as beaches filled with American troops and equipment. Trucks bogged down in treacherous sand. Artillery pieces sank to their axles completely. Ammunition dumps stacked up in neat, vulnerable piles. When he counted 10,000 Marines crowded onto the narrow beachhead, he picked up his telephone calmly. All stations, he spoke into the receiver with deadly precision. Commence firing immediately. The earth erupted with violent force. From hidden positions throughout Mount Suribachi, Japanese artillery opened fire with scientific precision. Every gun had been pre-sighted on specific beach zones. Every range had been calculated and tested thoroughly. Shells began falling among Marines with mechanical regularity. One every few seconds, perfectly placed for maximum casualty infliction. But Mount Suribachi wasn't acting alone. Across the entire island, 21,000 Japanese soldiers emerged from their underground positions. Like an army of the dead rising from graves, they appeared everywhere at once. Machine guns chattered from cave mouths that should have been obliterated completely. Mortars fell like deadly rain from positions not appearing on any American map. Artillery pieces fired from bunkers that survived 3 days of Pacific War history's heaviest bombardment. Private Noten found himself pinned down in black sand, unable to move forward or backward as Japanese fire swept the beach in systematic patterns. It was like they had the whole area dialed in perfectly, he remembered years later. Every few yards, another shell would land exactly where they wanted it to fall. The Marines were trapped in a perfect killing field. Behind them lay the ocean depths. Ahead stretched a 15-foot terrace of volcanic ash they couldn't climb. Around them fell perfectly coordinated fire from positions they couldn't see or locate. Men began falling by the dozens first. Then, by the hundreds, as fire intensified. Lieutenant Colonel Johnson, watching his Marines die in this killing ground, made the decision that would define his legacy forever. Standing up in the hurricane of fire around him, he bellowed at his men with everything he had. "Okay, you bastards, let's get the hell off this beach right now!" This became Iwo Jima's rally cry that echoed through Marine Corps history. Marines who couldn't run began crawling forward through deadly sand, using sheer will to overcome the trap set for them. Some died within yards of their landing craft. Others made it to the terrace and began agonizing climbs up volcanic ash walls. They knew Japanese gunners waited for them at the top. But Admiral Blandy's old ladies weren't finished fighting yet. As massacre reports reached the fleet, something unprecedented happened in naval warfare history. The battleships abandoned their safe positions and charged directly toward the beach. Captain Harold "Pop" Groskopf of USS Nevada made a decision that broke every rule in the naval handbook. He ordered his ship to close to 2,500 yards, point-blank range where a lucky Japanese shell could sink his battleship entirely. But his Marines were dying and nothing else mattered more. At 15:52, Nevada's 14-inch guns opened fire in direct fire mode, like massive rifles aimed at specific targets. Groskopf had spotted muzzle flashes from a cave complex east of the beaches. Guns that survived 3 days of bombardment were still killing his Marines. Nevada's first salvo screamed across water in flat trajectory, striking cliff face with pinpoint accuracy achieved. The explosion was visible from every ship in the fleet. A column of smoke and debris rose 500 feet into the air. When it cleared, an entire cliff section had been blown away, along with the Japanese gun position hidden inside. "That's how you do it!" shouted a Marine artillery observer watching from the beach. Get those Navy boys in close, where they can see what they're shooting at. Other battleships followed Nevada's lead immediately. USS Tennessee moved to 3,000 yards. USS Idaho closed to 2,800 yards. For the first time in this battle, American firepower was being applied with surgical precision against targets that were actually there, not just suspected positions marked on outdated maps. But the damage was already done, catastrophically. By nightfall on February 19th, Marines had established their beachhead, but at a cost that shocked even veteran commanders. 2,500 casualties in a single day, including 519 killed in action. The beaches were littered with wrecked equipment and wounded men. Japanese artillery continued falling throughout the night. Corpsman Charles Johnson of the 3rd Battalion, 28th Marines, crawled into a shell hole as darkness fell. He tried to process what he had witnessed. "I looked at the beach, and it was like hell on earth," he would write in his diary. "Bodies everywhere, equipment burning, and we still don't know where they're firing from." The 3-day bombardment had failed catastrophically. 14,000 tons of shells. Pacific War history's most devastating pre-invasion barrage. Instead of destroying Japanese defenses, it merely drove them underground, where they became deadlier than ever before. Marines had landed successfully, but walked into warfare's most sophisticated trap ever devised. As the first night on Iwo Jima descended, both sides understood everything had changed forever. This wouldn't be a 4-day battle as predicted. It would be a 36-day nightmare that redefined what it meant to fight for every inch of ground. The Japanese had proven underground fortifications could survive any bombardment. Americans learned that sometimes the world's most powerful weapons are useless against enemies who refuse fighting on your terms. Admiral Blandy's old ladies would continue firing for 5 more weeks, eventually expending more ammunition than some entire World War I campaigns. But they'd never again have the luxury of believing firepower alone wins battles. The age of underground warfare had begun. Iwo Jima was its bloody baptism. Colonel Atsuchis, still alive in his Mount Suribachi command bunker, allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He surveyed the day's work carefully. His carefully planned defenses had performed exactly as designed, but he knew this was only the beginning of something larger. Tomorrow, the real battle would start in earnest. It would be fought not on the surface where ships could help, but in dark tunnels and caves where his men waited like patient spiders, waiting for Marines to come hunting them in the darkness below. 36 days later, guns finally fell silent on Iwo Jima completely. When smoke cleared and final casualty counts were tallied, the numbers told a story military planners still try understanding today. Admiral Blandy's old ladies had fired more than 14,000 tons of shells, enough explosive power to level a major city entirely. Marines had taken their objective successfully, raising the American flag on Mount Suribachi in World War II's most iconic photograph. Victory was achieved, but at a cost that shook the American military to its core. 6,800 Marines killed in action. 19,000 wounded in battle. The only World War II battle where American casualties exceeded Japanese losses. Marine Corps history's bloodiest 36 days. All because a 3-day bombardment failed to accomplish what it was designed to do. Colonel Kanahiko Atsuchis never lived to see the final outcome. He died in his Mount Suribachi command bunker, fighting to the last man as his tunnel network was systematically cleared by Marines using flamethrowers and demolition charges. His body was never found. Likely entombed forever in volcanic caves he defended so brilliantly. But Atsuchi's legacy lived on in the man who taught him everything about underground warfare. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi took lessons learned at Iwo Jima, applied them on even larger scale at Okinawa, where Japanese forces would inflict 82,000 American casualties in their final desperate stand. The psychological impact of these battles reached all the way to the White House. President Harry Truman faced an impossible decision. Military planners estimated that invading Japan's home islands would cost 1 million American casualties, largely because Japanese had perfected the underground fortress strategy that made naval bombardment useless. Rather than watch his Marines die in countless more Iwo Jimas, Truman authorized atomic weapons use against Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The bombs that ended World War II were, in a very real sense, the direct result of Admiral Blandy's failed bombardment and the underground fortress strategy it couldn't defeat. Iwo Jima's lessons echoed through every subsequent American conflict. In Vietnam, tunnel networks at Kyu Chi proved nearly impossible to destroy with conventional firepower. In Afghanistan, cave complexes in mountains required ground troops to clear them one by one. In Iraq, insurgents used the same principle of hiding underground, emerging to attack before disappearing again into hidden positions. Modern military doctrine now recognizes what Japanese discovered in 1944, that in warfare, intelligence and preparation often matter more than raw firepower alone. Today's bunker-buster bombs and precision-guided munitions are direct descendants of problems first encountered off Iwo Jima, where Pacific War history's most powerful bombardment failed because it was aimed at wrong targets. The human cost extends far beyond mere numbers. Lieutenant Colonel Chandler Johnson, who rallied his Marines with his famous battle cry, was killed by a Japanese sniper, just days before the island was declared secure. He never lived to see the flag-raising ceremony that made his regiment famous. Never knew his words, "Let's get the hell off this beach," would become Marine Corps legend. Captain Pop Groskov of USS Nevada, who broke naval protocol to save Marines on the beach, would be haunted by casualties his ship couldn't prevent. Years later, he told his family that Iwo Jima was the only battle where he felt his guns had failed the men they were supposed to protect. Today, Iwo Jima remains largely uninhabited, its black beaches and volcanic caves serving as natural memorial to one of warfare's most bitter lessons. Japanese and American veterans have returned together for remembrance ceremonies. Former enemies united by their shared understanding of what happened there. Beneath the island's surface, many of General Kuribayashi's tunnels remain intact, a testament to engineering skill and strategic thinking that nearly made Iwo Jima America's greatest defeat instead of its most costly victory. Archaeological surveys have revealed that less than 60% of the tunnel network was ever discovered by American forces, meaning thousands of Japanese soldiers died in chambers that remain sealed to this day. Iwo Jima's story isn't just about Japanese fortifications that survived American bombardment. It's about the moment when warfare itself evolved beyond traditional military thinking's reach. It's about what happens when unstoppable force meets immovable will, and how the collision of those two principles writes history in blood and sacrifice. Admiral Nimitz said it best when he declared that among Americans who served on Iwo Jima, uncommon valor was a common virtue. But he could have said the same about Japanese defenders, who turned an 8-square-mile island into a fortress that changed war's nature itself. The next time you hear about smart bombs and precision strikes, remember Iwo Jima, where Pacific War history's most devastating bombardment failed because it couldn't see 6 feet underground, and where 30,000 Marines learned that sometimes the deadliest enemy is the one you never see coming.